The crisis for the British royal family could be about to get a whole load worse, with Sarah Ferguson, yes, Fergie, the former Duchess of York, Andrew Mountbatten, Windsor's long estranged wife, panicking that she is next to be arrested in the growing Epstein misconduct in public office probe that has already seen Andrew and Peter Mandelson both face potential charges for misconduct in public office. Of course, two arrests that put the very future of King Charles and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer under threat. Now, Rob Shooter, the former royal courtier turned reporter, has come up with this insane exclusive saying that police sources believe Sarah Ferguson's arrest could be inevitable, with insiders claiming authorities are closing in as legal pressure mounts. Perhaps that's the reason Fergie is doing everything possible to stay away from returning to the UK. So I want to take you through this bombshell report from Rob Shooter, who writes, Sarah Ferguson has gone to ground, and sources tell me she may never return to Britain. As legal pressure intensifies around Prince Andrew, Fergie is said to be hiding out in the UAE, sheltered by a wealthy friend who has offered security, privacy, and a very comfortable refuge. She has gone into the fire, a longtime confidant tells me. This isn't a holiday, it's survival. She will be arrested next if she returns to the UK. It's only a matter of time. It's inevitable, police sources said. She's been looked after financially and emotionally, but she's terrified. Terrified of what? There's a deep fear that if she comes back to the UK, she could be swept up in Andrew's legal chaos, even locked up herself. Another insider confides the fear feels and the reality is real to her. Friends say she feels safer thousands of miles from Windsor than a few minutes away. Right now, there's more chance of Meghan Markle returning to England than Fergie, says a royal watch referencing Ms. Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. That's how dark this has become. For now, London is off the table and exile feels like protection. Now, of course, that emerges just after news that Fergie had been staying in a £13,000 a night Swiss wellness retreat, but she isn't believed to have paid for her stay at the Paracelsus Recovery in Zurich. At the same time, life has just got worse for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, with The Sun revealing today that he is now banned from horse riding following his shock arrest over the Epstein bombshells. And of course, all of this comes at a time when the British royal family itself is under threat. King Charles under peril. And it was fascinating for me to see Trevor Kavanagh, my old colleague at the Sun newspaper, a man very much with his finger on the pulse of what the British public thinks, raise the prospect now that the royal family may not survive this. Watch.
Kevin, I think that that deference is now dead. I think the royal family is reeling and could seriously be in danger itself. What the power of the throne and the monarchy was that anyone who crossed it was immediately in trouble, either in terms of their career, their future. Society would freeze them out and so on. That is over. Now we've got a free-for-all, and it's probably uglier than the reverse. So this is something that the royal family has to confront and deal with, and I'm not sure that it's got any weapons left. I think that they are on the back foot. They are a decimated group of people. You haven't got the royal family as we've known them, a group of people. You've got Prince William and you've got King Charles and you've got their partners and wives and you've got Princess Anne. You haven't got Prince Harry and you haven't got Prince Andrew, and perhaps good riddance, both of them. But the survivors, if you might call them, are on their own, and they're having to balance and juggle the future of the monarchy all by themselves with precious little and maybe fast diminishing support from the general public.
And actually, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are just causing more trouble for the British royal family, in my opinion, with this deranged fake new royal tour kicking off today in the Middle East. They're in Jordan, weighing into the Israel-Palestinian conflict, something the royal family have been determined to avoid, and they're being hosted by all people of Dr. Tedros, that corrupted head of the World Health Organization. So this is a disaster trip, and it's not going to help the reputation of the British royal family at all. So to my superstar panel on this, Advance UK's Nick Buckley and Father Calvin Robinson. So Father Calvin, things just keep getting worse. I mean, do you think this is just paranoia from Sarah Ferguson that she could in some way be swept up in Andrew's legal troubles? I mean, I do know that she's mentioned constantly in the Epstein files, but there doesn't seem to be any suggestion that she's involved in the sex trafficking as far as I can see, or at least the sex trafficking allegations. And of course, when it comes to misconduct in public office, she was not a member of the royal family at that time, and she did not hold a formal envoy role like Andrew did. So I know there's been suggestions that the police might want to talk to her as part of their investigation, but that's a different thing.
It's quite confusing. I've looked through some of these files, and all I've seen on Fergie is that she's a bit pervy, a bit weird, talks about her daughters in a very strange way, inappropriately. But I haven't seen any suggestion that she was guilty of any crimes. So I don't know why she would be afraid of returning to London and possibly being arrested, unless she is guilty of crimes that we don't know of. I mean, I haven't seen all the files. There are 3.5 million of them. And so perhaps there's more in there, or perhaps there's more in the other 3 million that haven't been released yet. But if it is just a case of her husband is guilty of something and she's a bit paranoid because of that, then she should know that she could not be prosecuted for the guilt of her own husband or ex-husband. That's not how our legal system or the American legal system works. So I'm not sure what she's scared of, unless it's an admission of guilt.
Nick Buckley, I think to me, this is more Fergie just unraveling, because I do think what she can't recover after this Epstein files leak is her reputation. I mean, she took her 2 young daughters, I mean, they were 19 and 21, to visit the world's most prolific paedophile just days after he was first released from prison. And then she was engaging in email communication with him where she spoke about the fact that Eugenie, her youngest, was on a shagging weekend. I mean, from a moral perspective, I think that's unrecoverable. But do I think Fergie faces losing her liberty like Andrew does? I would be surprised.
But if you was Fergie and your former husband, who was a prince of the realm, has just been arrested, you suddenly realise the old days are over. The old days of the elite, of this particular generation of elite, of doing what they want is over. She must be terrified, because she thought her and her former husband were untouchable. He's the son of probably one of the greatest monarchs we've ever had. And suddenly he's arrested. The police turned up at his door. She has no idea what she's involved in. She has no idea, dodgy dealings. So she just may run away to see what goes on there. And then you were talking before about the other arrests in this. I think this is what's happening. I think the elite at the moment are sacrificing the old elite for the status quo.
Yes.
If we give them their heads, so Peter Mandelson, no one cares about him anymore now. He's not done anybody favors for 2 decades. I don't owe him anything. Let's sacrifice him. Let's sacrifice Prince Andrew. The public will then go, yes, we've cleaned house now, and the status quo can continue.
I think you're completely right. I absolutely believe that's what's going on. Sorry, Father Calvin.
What does 13 grand a night get you?
I know!
Yeah, a free minibar.
Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, one hell of a good minibar, I imagine. But look, I think you're completely right with what is going on, Nick Buckley, because we even hear now from royal sources that Charles would rather Andrew probably face trial and either be found guilty or innocent, because at least it would move attention away from him, because we do have to speak about King Charles and his own friendship with Peter Mandelson, which I will do in one moment. But of course, one of the most shocking developments is the fact that Andrew and Peter Mandelson were arrested because of claims that they were planning to flee the country. And it has emerged today. I mean, this story is just nuts, right? It has emerged today that the person who actually shopped Mandelson to the police was the Speaker of the House, Lindsay Hoyle, who had apparently been in the British Virgin Islands and picked up this news that Mandelson was planning to scalp there. Although Mandelson has denied this, and in some ways it doesn't really make sense that he would do that because the British Virgin Islands is a British territory, so he could have been expatriated. But anyway, this is what happened when Lindsay Hoyle, actually made that announcement, as if we didn't need any more bombshell announcements in the House of Commons this afternoon.
Members will be aware of comments in the media regarding the arrest of Lord Mandelson. To prevent any inaccurate speculation, I'd like to confirm that upon receipt of information that I felt it was relevant, I passed this on to the Metropolitan Police in good faith, as is my duty and responsibility. It is regrettable this rapidly ended in the media. As this is a live investigation, members will understand that it would not be appropriate to make any further comment, and I'd like to caution members from doing so.
Yeah, so the cover-up, the silence continues. But do you know what no one in the mainstream media is speaking about? And I think we need to, and I'm not doing this to pile on, but I think it is an angle of the story that hasn't been covered, is the King's own close friendship with Peter Mandelson.
Dan Wootton raises a series of claims that deserve closer examination, not because they are sensational, but because of what they imply. In the segment you've just heard, Dan leans heavily on a widening crisis frame, that the British royal family is facing a deepening Epstein-linked scandal, that Sarah Ferguson may be next, that establishment figures are being arrested or investigated, and that the monarchy itself is running out of credibility and defensive options. He also folds in a second theme, that Harry and Meghan, by appearing in politically sensitive regions and associating with controversial international figures, risk amplifying reputational damage for the Crown even without formal royal roles. My purpose here isn't to react emotionally, or to attack Dan as a commentator. It's to examine the structure of the argument, the incentives, the evidence threshold, and the strategic consequences if audiences accept or reject the framing. Let's start with the core engine of the segment, a single exclusive report attributed to Rob Shooter, described as citing police sources and insiders who believe an arrest of Sarah Ferguson is inevitable if she returns to the UK. That is an extremely strong claim. Inevitable is not a casual word. It implies a decision has already been made, that the legal ground is firm, and that procedural steps are simply pending. And that's precisely why viewers should pause. When you hear inevitability, ask, what is the underlying mechanism? Is this a formal charging decision? A warrant? A documented investigative step? Or is it a narrative inference built from proximity, meaning, she is mentioned in files, therefore she is next? Dan does acknowledge, to his credit, the gap between moral disgust and legal exposure. He even notes that, on misconduct in public office, Sarah Ferguson would not obviously fit the same category as someone who held an official state-linked role. That distinction matters. Mentioned in files is not the same as chargeable conduct. And public anger is not the same as legal jeopardy. But then the program pivots quickly back to the adrenaline of the story, hiding out, luxury retreats, wealthy friends, exile, survival. These details aren't proof. They're atmosphere. They create a psychological certainty in the viewer, the sense that fear equals guilt, flight equals evidence. And that's where we have to be careful. Fear can be guilt. It can also be panic, reputational dread, or simply the rational response of someone watching a scandal metastasize and wondering if they'll be dragged into it by association. In high-profile cases, people don't just fear courts, they fear headlines, leaks, and trial by implication. The next layer of Dan's argument is political, the idea that the establishment is sacrificing figures' old elites to preserve the system. This is not an absurd concept on its face. Institutions do manage crises by ring-fencing, distancing, and sometimes allowing certain actors to take the fall. But there's a difference between institutional crisis management and a coordinated sacrificial plot. The first is common. The second requires evidence, because it crosses into conjecture.
Sykes of the Royalist Substack has written about this in some fascinating detail today, and I wanted to share some of it with you. He writes, with both Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor now under criminal investigation over their alleged dealings with Jeffrey Epstein, King Charles is fighting to put distance between the monarchy and a widening scandal. That challenge may be hard, not least because Mandelson was one of the key political operators who helped rehabilitate Charles and Queen Camilla after the death of Diana, and because he still knows a great many royal secrets. Indeed, Charles maintained a close friendship with Mandelson, forged in the years when his closest advisor, Mark Boland, was engaged in a controversial project to try and rehabilitate his wife, Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles and Mandelson were introduced in 1997 and became friends after Mandelson, who was nicknamed the Prince of Darkness for his mastery of the dark arts of spin, was introduced to Charles via a political couple affiliated with the Thatcher regime, Carla and Charles Powell. Carla was a mutual friend of Camilla, and Mandelson was soon being regularly invited to Highgrove. Charles later appointed him to be a member of his Privy Council. Charles's friendship with Mandelson is a remarkable metaphor for just how deeply embedded in Britain's establishment Mandelson was. He prided himself on his access to power. That access very clearly included the then Prince of Wales. Charles's troubled public image in the years after his divorce from Diana and her subsequent death pushed him towards exactly the sort of political fixes Mandelson and his ilk embodied. As part of that effort, Boland approved of the friendship with Mandelson and is thought to have used him to leak stories to the media favouring Camilla. Mandelson, whose specialty was rebranding unpopular causes, seemed a perfect ally. In the years that followed, Mandelson moved in the same social and professional circles as Charles and Camilla, often via the crossover world of charity galas, political receptions, and media-friendly campaigns. Behind the scenes, Mandelson is understood to have helped place stories about Camilla in the press and on television, building a narrative of her warmth, humour, and resilience. The broader media campaign, driven from Clarence House but executed through trusted journalists and fixers, slowly shifted Camilla's image from home-wrecking mistress to loyal consort and good egg. What makes all of this so significant is not just that Mandelson was in the room for some of the most sensitive conversations about the future of the monarchy, but that he was treated as a confidant. Friends of both men have described how Charles would ring Mandelson for advice, particularly on how to handle hostile briefings and damaging headlines, and how Mandelson in turn would call on his contacts in newsrooms and boardrooms. No one is suggesting that Charles knew the full extent of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, still less that he had any inkling of the allegations now under police investigation. Just as with Andrew, the king is likely to say that he was misled, that he relied on the reassurances of colleagues, and that he never saw anything that gave him cause to suspect criminality. But the fact remains that Mandelson was allowed deep into the royal inner circle at a time when Charles was reshaping both his personal life and public role of monarchy. He knows who said what and when about Camilla's rehabilitation. He knows which journalists were briefed, which stories were planted, and how for Charles was prepared to go. How far he was prepared to go to secure the future Queen's acceptance. The Mandelsons' connection also sits within a pattern in Charles's life. His tendency to lean on controversial outsiders. Remember, for more than 2 decades, he corresponded with Jimmy Savile, and he was given the job of interviewing prospective private secretaries. So Charles certainly doesn't know how to pick his friends. He also took lots of money from Qatar, and that's a story for another day. But Tom Sykes says, so far mainstream coverage of the Mandelson story is focused on the immediate political stakes for the UK Prime Minister and the future of his government. Much less attention has been paid to the Mandelson-Charles connection and what it tells us about the depth of Epstein's reach into the British establishment and about the King's own history of relying on controversial figures to burnish his image. And Nick Buckley, given what you were just saying, I do think it feels highly relevant, very difficult for the king, that he did have this close relationship with Peter Mandelson, which is now almost been buried. It's not been spoken about in all of this.
And the fact that the government, the elite, don't care that he's connected to the King of England shows just how much power the monarchy has at the moment. It doesn't have that much. This never would have happened under Queen Elizabeth II. Wouldn't have happened. There's been a shift in the elite, in the establishment. They know there's going to have to be some scapegoats. They know they're going to have to reposition their pieces on the chessboard if they're going to survive. And these people always survive. So they've put a couple of pawns out there. Those pawns may have been queens 30 years ago, but they're not queens now. They're just pawns, sacrificial pawns. And we saw that with the Speaker of the Commons. Isn't it uncanny that a Labour MP is the one who told the police about Mandelson for him to be arrested? Now, when Labour are talking about Mandelson, they can say, but it was us that started this. We got him arrested. So this is just covering up, and sacrificing people they don't need anymore. And also, the secrets people like Mandelson hold, those secrets are not relevant anymore. Otherwise, they would not risk him going public. So whatever he's got, it's all out to date. The new elite cannot be damaged by what Peter Mandelson knows.
Father Calvin Robinson, your view?
Yeah, I think it's terrifying that this man not only had his claws into the UK government for so long, for almost 2 decades, but also into His Majesty's
The King of
monarchy.
England.
That's shocking to me. But it's not just Peter Mandelson, obviously. It's Jeffrey Epstein. He was part of his network, of his spidery connection. So how much do these paedophilic elites, how much power do they hold? It looks like the king himself is just a pawn, just a puppet. Like we're being governed by a dark force that we don't even know.
Yeah, it's certainly very concerning, isn't it? And then you see Dr. Tedros with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and it's like, no, you just don't get it. But look, stand by, you two, because we're about to reveal today's Union Jackass. We're going to see who's won. But first, I just want to get to your feedback. Thank you, 14 Barber, for the super chat, by the way. Legend of Myrrh says, we don't need to reform what we have or conserve what we've got. I certainly don't want to advance what's happening now. I want to restore my beautiful country. So some backing for Rupert Lowe there. Todd Morlanx said, this submissive attitude from a supposed feminist, this is in regards to Hannah Spencer, the Green Party candidate, and Gorton and Denton, towards misogynistic religion is pathetic. Gridley describes Tim Stanley as a closeted liberal, while Karen Mead describes Matt Goodwin as being so entitled. Lady Puddycat said, I'm sure it's fashionable to say they don't like Tommy Robinson if they actually listen to him instead of believing the distorted and cherry-picked view of him. And from Ideology UK, who says the only problem with Restore Britain is that their policymakers are so young. But, you know, Rupert Lowe's no spring chicken, so maybe that's a good balance. Myra8933 says we have Islamists in Parliament because of the first past the post system. And Joe White on the attack of young Bob outside that mosque in Whitechapel says Bob either needs security or identify as a woman to get the police to come quicker. Yes, straight white man. They're not going to care about him, are they? Okay, a reminder of our Union Jackass nominees today. So Father Calvin Robinson went for Layla Cunningham, and that was for, of course, that Piers Morgan uncensored disaster and so much more. I nominated Meghan Markle for this faux royal tour, and Nick Buckley nominated Nadia Hussein, who seems to be on some type of new sobbing everything happened badly to me because of racism, when actually, I mean, she would have been nothing if she hadn't appeared on the Great British Bake Off and won, despite her ethnicity. So I don't really understand that. But I've come last today. How dare you? 22% of you going for Meghan Markle. The runner-up is Nick Buckley with 25%. But winning today's Union Jackass, Father Calvin Robinson as Layla Cunningham is named the worst Briton in the world today with 53% of our vote. Father Calvin Robinson, congratulations. And Nick Buckley, good luck. Good luck. What's your final message to those people in Gorton and Denton who are tossing up whether to go for you or whether to go to Reform UK tomorrow?
My advice would be this. First of all, make sure you vote, because if you're not voting tomorrow, you're letting other people's vote count for double. And don't look at the political parties. Vote for the best candidate. Who's the best candidate with the best background, with the best history, the best experience, who's going to improve your area? Forget national issues. Who's going to improve your street, your life, your neighborhood? Vote for the candidate. Stop voting for parties.
Well, good luck, Nick Buckley. Good luck. I hope it goes well for you.
If you claim arrests and investigations are being deployed as strategic sacrifices, you're implying motive, orchestration, and selective enforcement. That's a high bar. What we can responsibly say is simpler. In any scandal that touches power, there will be competing incentives to disclose, to conceal, to scapegoat, to delay, to appear decisive, and to protect reputations. The public should expect messaging battles. But we should resist sliding into the comfort of a single totalizing explanation. Now, Dan also uses a familiar rhetorical technique. Why isn't the mainstream media talking about this angle? In this case, it's the King's alleged historical relationship with Peter Mandelson, presented via Tom Sykes reporting and framed as an example of the monarchy relying on controversial fixers. Even if you set aside the most explosive insinuations, this is a legitimate investigative question in principle. When a public institution relies on image management networks, what risks does that create? Who gains access? Who holds influence? Who knows what, and how does that become leverage during a crisis? But again, the critical distinction is between proximity and complicity. It is possible for institutions to associate with people who later face scrutiny without the institution having knowledge of wrongdoing. The ethical question then becomes, what were the vetting norms, what were the warning signals, and what did the institution learn, if anything, from past proximity to risk? Finally, Dan brings Harry and Meghan back in, framing their travel and associations as a disaster trip for royal reputation. Here the pattern is clear. The monarchy tries to avoid political entanglement. The Sussex brand, in Dan's view, enters contested spaces and creates fresh headlines that the palace cannot control. The deeper implication is not whether you like or dislike any individual. It's about brand externalities. When you retain royal titles or public recognition, your actions can be interpreted as adjacent to the institution you claim to have left. That creates strategic pressure on the palace to clarify boundaries, not because of personal drama, but because ambiguity becomes costly in an unstable environment. So the key takeaway from this segment isn't the most dramatic line. It's the underlying tension, a monarchy that survives on restraint and symbolic distance colliding with a media ecosystem that rewards proximity, personalization, and constant escalation. The real question is, in a crisis, does the institution regain public trust through transparency and consistent standards, or through insulation, silence, and managed narratives? Because if audiences begin to believe rules differ for the powerful, the long-term damage isn't just to individuals. It's to legitimacy itself. And that, more than any single exclusive, is what deserves close attention.